cost.
What are you doing?
How do you spell your name?
Mr. Slim.
Hi, what's up, Jesse?
I will be here on tomorrow, so can I check my LEP now?
Sure.
Thank you.
Did you reassess?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay,
Sure.
thank you.
Thanks. Mr. Swim?
Hello?
Come on in. Did you talk to anyone else who's thinking about coming?
I think Josh may.
I know Will saying is coming.
All right.
Yeah, he's I think he has to go to Kiko first.
A couple of people said that. Who runs Key Club?
I don't know. I think it's the library.
Oh, okay.
Mr. Paul.
Yep.
Did he like use one of those things for like do you just chop people up? Thanks,
It's a joke.
Wait, what's the bottom thing?
It's a slot trap. You ever seen that?
No.
Oh, phenomenal. Chopping up and dicing things. You put it down like this and it has a little rim around the outer edge. So you can have like your tomatoes or whatever in there. And you just pop, 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 and it dices them up for you so you don't have to worry about being a good chef.
There's we originally filmed a vlog. We completely forgot about it. And then everything thought about just posting the intro after this. I don't know, it's quality standard.
If it's just going to be us, we may as well just go ahead and just start talking. This can be real okay, but so I first wanted to just kind of review each of the elements with you guys, just as like a, hey, here's what the rubric looks like. So again, we want to get the easy points. You should be able to consistently hit 4 out of 7. That's the goal. It's to get to that consistent level. Thesis and claim at the top. Again, this is the rubric that's used by the AP people as we go through. It's just a little unwieldy. It's the same info, but thesis, you got to make a claim. You have to be specific. It has to be an actual argument that you're making, that here's kind of the reasoning behind this, not just that something happened. More often than not, these questions are trying to do that for you. So it's like evaluate the degree to which. So it's already acknowledging that there's some degree that this has happened. You just got to tell us how much based on and why that happens. What's that reason? Contextualization, broader historical context. Again, I really think that comes first. That's why they're flopped on Tom Ritchie's rubric that we use. And then the evidence. You got to use at least 3 pieces of evidence. That's your description point if you tie them to the topic in some way. So even if you just briefly, let's say that you had no structure to your essay whatsoever, but you were able to somehow connect what was written in 3 of those documents to the prompt, they would give you the description point. Does that make sense? But then what we really want to go for is that second point where you're saying, okay, here's how these things link together and advance my argument forward. Here is this example from this document that shows how my argument is correct. And then the last point for evidence is the outside evidence. Bring in something that is going to help your argument out. Something that's not in the documents itself. It gets sketchy, and I'll get into this a little bit more, but it gets sketchy. Let's say that there's a document from, I don't know, Martin Luther, but it's not 95 Theses. If you were then to use something specific from the 95 Theses, you really have to make it distinctive. Okay? It can't be something that just like leads into something from the document. Yeah, come in. Nervous? I guess I should have mentioned first that I am streaming this from YouTube Live. A couple of people asked. The main reason I'm really doing it is because it automatically records it, so now I can post it later on for people who couldn't make it watch. I'm going to try not to say any of your names during this, but no, again, it's not a public link. It's just a link that I sent to you guys. That's the only way you can view this stream. So right now we're just going back over the basics, and then we'll do some practicing as we go through. I would say by 3:30, definitely by 3:45, but probably by 3:30, we'll be able to be. Okay. I mean, you're here voluntarily, so in theory you can leave. Analysis and reasoning. For the first point, this is CAP. This is showing how 3 of those documents, the documents themselves, not what's in the documents, can impact an argument in some way. Again, you guys are really good at telling me what the point of view is, but I need to know why it matters. Okay, so this person wrote this thing and this person's from here. Okay, so. And again, this is the rubric that we use. I just think it lays it out a little bit better because I think contextualization should lead into your thesis. That should be your first paragraph. You don't need an intro paragraph. Nobody cares. So why not contextualize right off the bat, lead it into your thesis, make that connection. Then just remember, describe for 3, but really it's probably going to come out in a couple of them. I would say at this point, we need to stop using quotes altogether because you guys are struggling in terms of time and in figuring out how to limit yourselves, okay? Just paraphrase. That'll show that you understood the document and that you've connected the document. Support, hey, come on in. And then explain is your CAP. Then as we get to the bottom, there's the OI, one additional piece of evidence, and finally complex understanding, which we'll get to in a minute. The biggest issues that I think that we need to really make sure that we hammer out in the next 2 DBQs is contextualization and the CAP, because the CAP isn't on the LEQs, and the contextualization should be an easy point for us by the time we're done this course for the year. So that should be like a free one for us to get. All right, my thoughts on each of them. How should this be laid out? I think your first paragraph should really be contextualization leading into your thesis statement. Again, I'll break down each of these points in a little bit more individual. I think that your descriptions and your support should be body paragraphs. Really, the way that you want to think about it is, and this should come out in your thesis, you should have like 2 to 3 arguments that you're making, evaluate the degree to which blah, blah happened, here are these arguments that are going to show that. Here are my pieces of evidence that I'm pulling out that are going to prove that. You should have one paragraph per argument. That's your goal. I get that and ultimately in the scoring of this, structure doesn't matter. But in terms of being a better writer, structure does matter. You should have separate paragraphs for each argument that you're making. And with that in mind, you need to make sure then each of your examples is linked to another example in some way, right? You're grouping these documents together somehow. 6, but really 7 details used in support, 3, but really 4 cap. Outside information has to be more than a sentence, has to include a proper noun. You will not get credit for it if there's no proper noun. It has to be a specific writing, a specific idea coming out of someone's writing. Give as much info as you can so that they know you don't just recall this random piece of trivial information and are trying to pass it off as actual knowledge. And then finally, complex understanding. That's essentially, I think, the flip side of your argument, but that would be, in my mind, the last paragraph prior to restating your thesis. I know that Mrs. Owens will talk about it being the second paragraph, so she'll actually have the modifier come right after the thesis statement. I think that works just as well. You just don't want to mix it into your arguments because then it becomes that much harder for your grader to say, oh yeah, this person knows that this is just a modifier and not a piece of the argument itself. So contextualization. Put the events of the prompt in a broader historical perspective. So if your prompt is talking about the Reformation, you want to be thinking about the 50 to maybe 200 years prior to the Reformation, okay? And how those 50 to 200 years prior to the Reformation, what's going on is affecting what the prompt is asking you. So if the prompt is asking you, for example, our second one was about the Reformation, and is it more about power or religion, right? And if that's the case, you need to find some way to tie in the events prior to that to show how they influence the events of the Reformation regarding power and religion. Okay? You want to think about the 4 C's. So think cause and effect. What is happening prior to that that is causing this thing to happen? How is that happening? What's that relationship? Or how are things staying the same from the events before to those events now? How are things changing? Continuity and change over time. Okay? That's what you're trying to consider. And then even better if you can connect it to your actual argument, not just what the topic is. So if your argument is discussing that power is more, and you're talking about the role of monarchs in feudal society moving into the Reformation, that's really good because now you're talking about a specific thing that is going to be tied. Again, you got to shoot for a proper noun in there too. Okay? That's one of the ones. And so when we start practicing in a minute here, this is one that we really want to concentrate on. Okay? So here's an example. This was one of the examples we pulled. The Protestant Reformation was a time in history where the religious power of the current time was being threatened by new views. From the Great Schism and the Black Plague, a new religious uncertainty was rising. The current church in power, the Catholic Church, had merely given the common folk lies about how they could potentially cure themselves by putting all their faith in God. This lie, coupled with the severe backlash of the 3 popes, were supposed to be symbols of purity and fought each other for the position of a pope, for the post of a pope, further debilitated the power of Catholicism. From this weakened state, Martin Luther and his ideas came to lead those who had lost faith in God. That's an incredible job of saying, here are these specific things. Hey guys, come on in.
Hey.
Sure. Hey. You want to come in? DBQ review. It's not that different.
What DBQ?
You're streaming, right?
Yeah.
Protestant Reformation.
Go sit down. So this and
Yeah, you want to sit for a little bit?
so with the contextualization, it's not just about what happens prior, it's about how that's going to affect the argument in some way. And I was just telling these guys, this is such a perfect example of this because it discusses the Great Schism and the Black Death, tells us briefly what they are, like what happened, but then is able to show how that's going to influence the argument that is being made here. People are losing faith in the church because of these 2 events, which is going to lead to my thesis to show why the Reformation is more about power than it is about religion. Does that make sense? So you have to make sure you're thinking like 50 to 150 years or so prior to the events of the prompt, and that you're going to use them to show influence. How is what happens there impacting your prompt, and even better, if you can show how it impacts your argument.
Okay? Give us that tie, give us that link. Thesis statement can be 2 sentences. Use the formula. Cheat. Okay? They want to give you points. Don't be afraid to cheat. Use the formula. Give us your modifier. Although some people might say that this is the answer. The answer is actually this because of reasons A, B, C, or reasons A and B. I like 3. Things come in 3s, right? 3 little pigs. I think that's keep in mind that for each one of these, you should really be pushing yourself to have 2 documents that are going to apply to those arguments, right? You want to make sure that you have at least 2 documents grouped together within any argument that you're making. So it's possible you might only have 2 reasons for this because you used 2 documents as your modifier, 3 documents for one reason, 2 documents for the other reason. That's okay. But you want to make sure that you try and have at least 2 groups. Does that make sense? Let's practice. Grab a piece of paper.
Yes.
You can do this with a partner?
Mr. Slim, you have my thing over there.
I do.
Oh my God. Where's
You're
the
immortalized.
octopus? The glorious revolution. Wait, where is it?
It's up on the board.
Oh,
My 3 seconds of fame.
Okay, so write it down. Write it down first. We're going to discuss. Okay?
Yeah.
Evaluate whether or not the Glorious Revolution of 1688. So let's talk first. What country are we talking about?
England.
England. Good. All right. So we're off to a good start. Okay? Although evaluate whether or not the Glorious Revolution of 1688 can be considered a part of the Enlightenment. All right? Give it a shot. See what you come up with. Thesis statement. We're doing thesis statement right now. I get it. You don't have docs in front of you, but you can still come up with a thesis. Thesis statement, thesis statement.
Because of the, wait, the Glorious Revolution was religion, like sort of religion based, right? It wasn't? Wait, you're joking.
It was possible.
I thought it was like King Henry. He was like, I want. Yeah, it's a brick from Versailles.
I heard you said let's get
Taking the words right out.
Wait, so the Glorious Revolution was
ideals.
I thought it still. Because I thought he was like, yo, I want to like divorce my wife, and everyone was like, no.
That's before. That's well before.
That's the wrong thing. It's okay. That is the wrong thing. That's
This
That was
remember
happening.
this is after.
Oh, that was the English. I thought the Glorious Revolution was right after the English took power. 30 years more.
30 years after the English. That's the only. But I got it. 30 years more was the only war like.
What was the Glorious Revolution about?
William and Mary are asked by England to come from the Netherlands and take over the throne.
Although the Glorious Revolution
Whatever
wasn't
I
very
wrote
smart,
down.
I think of the Enlightenment.
What's the floor right?
What was the format again? Oh, I wrote one.
Although your mom,
Oh,
it's actually this.
Wait, oh my god.
that was in second period. You were in third period.
Oh, I want.
Wait, this one.
That's so cute. Which is
Because we need a review for our DBQ.
Okay, listen.
The structure is the same.
I did worse. Our whole table did terrible on our DBQs for A push. I got a 3 out of 7. Normally I got like a 5 in here.
Shoot for 4.
This is
I got a
on my
3.5.
LQ, Mrs. Owens gave me a half point on my thesis, but I didn't put the word political in it.
Because she's like, oh yeah, for one of them you just have to like, there's something that she said, and I was like, wait, they were supposed
I'll
to do that
write
because I did not do that.
And then she said I wrote too much in my
Wait, what was the
contextualization.
thing
I was
that
like,
she said
tell me
to do?
about
And I was like, No, what was the thing that you?
3 sentences.
Yeah, mine are.
No, what was the thing that you wanted to do? And I was like,
All right, here we go. Let's hear an example. Who's got one? No one wants to share? Sam, go ahead.
I only partway through writing it.
Yeah, go ahead. Give us what you got.
Although it was 100 years before the French Revolution, the Glorious Revolution is a part of the Enlightenment due to the fact that it was about checking monarchical power and giving the people freedom.
I would say, I think that works. I think that works because you're hitting some of the things. What I would like to see, so I get that chronologically, you're going to make that note. I would like to see an actual argument besides just when it falls that would be in there too. But that was good. Give me another one. Yeah. Give me why it's, some people would say it's part of the Enlightenment.
Because it occurs right or during the beginning of the Enlightenment time period.
Okay.
The return to constitutionalism and the Glorious Revolution should not be considered part of the Enlightenment because it was not an idea from the Enlightenment, but an idea used prior to it.
Don't tell me that it was an idea prior. What was the idea? Yeah, don't beat around the bush. Talk about that specifically, right? Good. Yeah. What about something along the lines, I don't know, this. So, although the Glorious Revolution reestablished monarchy in England, which would seem to go against the ideas of individual liberties or something like that. Because England is set up as a constitutional monarchy and the future development of the English Bill of Rights, this monarchy is limited, which fits in with the ideas of John Locke and something like that, right? Because Locke is writing around that time. Okay, so that's kind of where my mind went. But again, it's practice. It's practice. It's practice. Give me a thumbs up, thumbs down, not on this one necessarily, but how do we feel on thesis statements, making sure that we hit those specific. Again, like, you don't have to feel beholden to my formula, but you have to have the elements of the formula in there somehow. What is the flip side, and what are your reasons with something specific? Okay? Don't say, because of the way in which something was used. Tell me the way that something was used, okay? You don't remember, it's not English class. Don't give me that broad foundation here. I want the specific point, I want the claim. Evidence. You want a plan. We're struggling, when you struggle to fit stuff in or see how stuff fits, it's because you just start writing. And I get it. I'm one of you. That's the way I roll. But you have to plan it out. Figure out which number documents. Do something like this, where here's your argument. Okay? Here are the 3 pieces of your argument that you're going to make. List, number the documents. 2 and 4 fit here, 3 and 1 fit here, whatever it is, so that you can, in your mind's eye, understand, okay, here's how I need to fit this in. Take that little bit of extra time to plan. Remember, this is a part of a larger block. You get what? 140 minutes, right? Okay, or excuse me, 100 minutes. 100 minutes total for your DBQ and LEQ. So it's up to you how you structure that time. But I think that taking that first 5 to 7 minutes to really plan stuff out before you start writing is essential. Yes. Yeah, they're similar in what they're asking. Analyze, evaluate. Last year's was easier. SAC is just answer now. Okay. Try for at least 2 documents per your claim or reason. And this is where we get to the evidence. Describing versus analyzing. First of all, stop quoting the documents. Seriously, stop it. Because what happens is you spend your time rewriting something that doesn't earn you anything. It doesn't get you there. By paraphrasing the document, you can get the point for the description and be able to use it in explanation. Stop quoting things. And if you are, make them short, tiny, use ellipses, chop the quote up. Okay? Describing, here's what the document says, Analyzing is, here's how the document fits my argument, fits my claim. Use it to express an idea versus just here's what it says. Okay? Paraphrase an idea and then explain how something from the document shows that argument is true. This statement in here, when John Locke says this, is going to show blah, blah, blah. You need 3 for description. I think those should come out as you go through. You may even get more than that as you go through, but you're going to need 6 for the support. That's why I say, really, you want to try and use all the documents. Oh, I did. You missed it. It was on an earlier slide. You blew it.
Shoot.
4.
That was on our Euro t-shirts last year. They banned them from the testing room.
Yeah. Mistakes were made. Cap, that's the last piece of using the evidence from the documents itself. Okay, this is your explanation on your rubric. Historical context, again, we have this kind of idea of context. Situate this document when it falls. This is right before, I don't know, Charles I loses his head. And therefore Cromwell hasn't totally assumed all the power. So, okay. Why does it matter? The key to these, you're really good at identifying what they are. If I give you a document, you can tell me the point of view and you can tell me who the person is. You can tell me what the purpose of that document is going to be. But I need you to use it in an argument. I need you to show, okay, here's why this person's point of view, this person is writing as this first-class citizen. Why does that matter? Who cares? What is that going to show us in your argument? Okay. Finally, outside information. Bring in an additional piece of evidence. Again, you've got to think proper nouns. You will not get credit for this without a proper noun. Okay. A specific idea or concept that that person came up with, person's name, specific battle, specific war. Probably not going to use a battle. And you have to use it in your argument. So just as you are kind of creating that structure over there where you're saying, all right, here are these different documents that apply to these claims. Take a moment and say, all right, what do I already know about this idea? Can I come up with a piece of outside information that supports that? Then you don't have to worry about doing it as you're writing. You can list it in your planning, as I mentioned. And again, I come back to this. You have to use a proper noun. You have to use that proper noun to show, you know. Okay. Here's another example of how politically this changes over time. Complex understanding, I think this is one of the toughest pieces because it has to be, first of all, the outside information has to be more than just like a word or a phrase. You have to use it. This really has to be, I would say, 2 to 3 sentences at the least. That'd be my guess. Okay. I like it at the end. I know you guys have Mrs. Owens. She likes it at the beginning, right after your contextualization and thesis. I like it at the end. This is your modifier. You get this from your thesis. If you use the formula to set up your thesis, you have already talked about what your complex understanding should be. Okay? If you're going to say, no, it doesn't change over time in your thesis, your complex understanding paragraph is, here's how it does change over time. Fair. That's a good comment. That's a good thought. So if you like really know it, if you know that you're going to get the point for it, put it in the beginning. I like that. I can get behind that. Mm-hmm. I think the easiest way to do it is the modifier from your thesis. I really do. You can do it some other ways. Make a connection to another time period that shows a similar concept to your claim. So for example, if the topic is speaking specifically about the Reformation, and you begin to show how a similar theme is brought out in the Renaissance, that would be a way to get that complex understanding point as well. Or you could use another area of the world. For example, like it doesn't have to be limited to AP European history. So if you are really strong in US, you can bring US history into it. For example, let's say you're talking about the changing roles of women in Europe. Where have I heard that question? Oh yeah, it's the LEQ I gave you. When changing women's roles in Europe, remember that? Okay. You can pull in the suffrage movement and use some of those names like Alice Paul, like Susan B. Anthony, okay? Like Lucretia Mott. Do those ring bells or no? All right. Sure. Sure, Mr. Slam, sure. Okay. Again, you have to include at least one proper noun, and the key here is it must connect to an argument. It can't just be this random piece of information where it's talking about conflict, and all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, and Hitler did that thing in World War II. Like, it really has to connect to an argument in some way, okay? Clearly demonstrate, it's another way to consider your argument, not just another point. So what I say is make this distinctive. Again, structure ultimately doesn't matter. Don't leave it up to your grader. Use the sledgehammer. Make it a separate paragraph so that your grader can easily see that you understand. Hey, this is just another thought that I have regarding this topic. It's not a piece of my actual argument from the documents. That's a different idea. Okay? Practice. You ready to practice? Oh, yeah, you did. Mm-hmm. So here's what I'd like us to do first. Before we even see the documents, I want you to contextualize. Right now, you can do it with a partner. You can do this juntos.
Another partner.
Yeah, never mind.
You should have like Euro kids last year come in. And
Well, Mrs. Owens, we had talked about maybe trying to do something where it's like a whole thing so that we can help each other and
I'll help
intermingle.
them with the art stuff and things like that.
Well, I heard there wasn't any last year,
Yeah, I know,
remember?
it sucked. Oh, there wasn't even European art on the art history exam. We thought content area 4 was the biggest thing. It was European Renaissance art. It was awful. One of my friends got an LEQ-ish thing on Starry Night,
Uh-huh.
and I got one on like some really random artwork. I was like, I'm gonna it sucked.
Like one of the masks.
Oh yeah, it
Guys,
was awful.
contextualization would be
I would say Renaissance.
Sledgehammer is so important.
Because now you're, in my mind, you're going to say.
They did the solution. How do you guys like the saloon?
The saloon we love.
I can probably end streaming this, right?
Yeah, no one's watching.
Yeah,